Human history is rarely driven by intentional genius. More often, it is shaped by accidental chemistry that early societies did not fully understand but intuitively learned to exploit. Around 5000 BC, in the arid expansion of ancient Babylonia, merchants traveling across early trade routes noticed a recurring failure in their logistics. Date palm wine, a valuable commodity brewed for trade and consumption, would frequently spoil when exposed to the air during long, hot journeys. Instead of a sweet, intoxicating beverage, merchants routinely opened their clay vessels to find a sharp, pungent, and intensely sour liquid. What these ancient traders were witnessing was the unintended isolation of Acetobacter bacteria, an airborne microorganism that feeds on ethanol and converts it into acetic acid. To a merchant focused on selling wine, this transformation was an economic loss. However, as these ruined batches accumulated, early human societies began to notice a unique property of this sour liquid. In an era thousands of years before the invention of artificial refrigeration, food spoilage was not merely an inconvenience. It was a primary driver of starvation, disease, and societal collapse. Fresh meat, seasonal fruits, and harvested vegetables decayed within days under the intense heat of the Middle East. The rotting process was driven by microscopic pathogens, primarily anaerobic bacteria like Clostridium botulinum, which thrived in moisture and ambient temperatures, releasing deadly toxins into the food supply. The accidental discovery of vinegar provided human civilization with its very first reliable chemical shield against decay. When food was submerged in this sour liquid, the high concentration of acetic acid immediately altered the environment on a molecular level. Acetic acid drops the pH of the medium significantly, typically bringing it down to a range between 2.5 and 3.5. This extreme acidity creates a hostile environment where almost no dangerous foodborne bacteria can survive or multiply. The cell walls of the pathogens are disrupted by the free hydrogen ions, neutralizing the bacteria before they can spoil the organic matter. Armed with this understanding, the Babylonians stopped viewing the sour wine as waste and began manufacturing it intentionally. They utilized date palms, raisins, and leftover grains to brew large quantities of this acidic fluid. Traveling merchants began filling separate jars with vinegar, using it as a crude but highly effective water purification agent. Stagnant or contaminated water from desert wells could be rendered safe to drink by mixing in a small quantity of vinegar, as the acetic acid content killed off waterborne pathogens that caused lethal gastrointestinal infections. Beyond water purification, the ability to submerge fish, meats, and vegetables in vinegar-filled jars meant that seasonal surpluses could now be preserved for months, and eventually years. This shifted the entire dynamic of human settlements. Tribes and early city-states were no longer entirely dependent on the immediate success of a weekly harvest. Food could be stored, transported across vast distances, and relied upon during harsh winters or periods of prolonged drought. The preservation of calories allowed populations to expand, stabilized local economies, and provided the physical sustenance required for long-distance exploration and the establishment of permanent trade networks across the ancient world. As agricultural techniques advanced and civilization expanded outward from Mesopotamia, the knowledge of this acidic preservation method traveled with them. By the time the foundations of early Egyptian and Mediterranean societies were being laid, vinegar had transitioned from a localized Babylonian accident into a standard, indispensable asset of human survival and food security. By the time classical Mediterranean civilizations rose to prominence, vinegar had transitioned from a mere preservative into a strategic asset for public health and empire building. In ancient Greece, during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, the application of this substance moved into the realm of structured science. Hippocrates, the physician widely regarded as the father of modern medicine, institutionalized the use of vinegar within clinical practice. Operating without any knowledge of modern microbiology, Hippocrates observed that wounds washed with sour wine healed far more reliably than those treated with plain water or left exposed to the air. He documented specific protocols utilizing vinegar as a primary antiseptic agent to cleanse physical ulcerations, prevent the onset of gangrene, and soothe stubborn respiratory conditions by mixing it with honey to create early medicinal syrups. Further west, the Roman Republic and subsequent empire recognized that the chemical properties of vinegar could be leveraged to solve one of the greatest logistical challenges in military history, keeping thousands of marching soldiers hydrated and free from disease. The Roman military mandated a daily ration of pasca for its common foot soldiers. Pasca was a beverage created by mixing low-grade, sour wine vinegar with water, often supplemented with aromatic herbs like coriander to mask the harsh taste. This drink was not a luxury, it was a rugged operational tool. The primary threat to an army on the move was rarely the enemy, but rather waterborne pathogens. Stagnant wells, slow-moving rivers, and contaminated water sources along military roads routinely triggered outbreaks of dysentery and cholera, which could liquidate an entire legion before it ever reached the battlefield. By forcing soldiers to mix their water with vinegar, the Roman High Command successfully utilized the antibacterial properties of acetic acid to sterilize their daily hydration supply. Furthermore, pasca provided essential vitamin C and basic nutrients, preventing the development of scurvy among troops whose diets relied heavily on dry grain rations. The cultural impact of pasca within Rome was deeply tied to class and military discipline. It was explicitly viewed as the fuel of the common soldier and the working peasant. High-ranking generals and elite patricians typically drank premium, aged sweet wines, and consuming pasca was seen as a sign of rugged solidarity with the troops. When Roman historians wanted to emphasize the discipline and humility of commanders like Cato the Elder, they highlighted that he drank the same vinegar-water mixture as his men. Conversely, providing a soldier with sweet wine instead of pasca was considered a dangerous breakdown of military order. This chemical utility extended into heavy military engineering and tactical logistics. During the Second Punic War in 218 BC, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca faced the seemingly impossible task of marching an army of tens of thousands of infantry, cavalry, and 37 war elephants across the Alps to invade Italy from the north. The primary obstacles were not just the steep terrain and freezing temperatures, but massive alpine landslides that completely blocked the narrow mountain passes. According to historical records preserved by the Roman historian Livy, Hannibal's engineers utilized a brutal combination of thermodynamics and chemical reactivity to clear these blockages. When confronted with immense limestone boulders that could not be moved by physical force, the Carthaginian army built massive wood bonfires directly on top of and around the stone. They maintained these fires until the rock absorbed intense heat. Once the boulders reached peak temperatures, the soldiers poured large quantities of cold vinegar directly into the natural fissures and frost cracks of the stone. The sudden, violent temperature drop caused severe thermal shock, fracturing the outer layers of the rock. Simultaneously, the highly reactive acetic acid chemically attacked the calcium carbonate structure of the limestone, rapidly degrading the integrity of the stone from within. Hannibal's engineers were then able to shatter the weakened boulders with basic iron picks, clearing a pathway through the Alps and allowing the Carthaginian army to execute one of the most famous surprise maneuvers in ancient warfare. As Europe moved out of antiquity and into the medieval period, the threat of macro-scale disease outbreaks forced communities to rely increasingly on vinegar as an accessible chemical defense. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, recurring waves of the Black Death devastated European populations, wiping out entire cities and collapsing local economies. Because the true vector of the plague, bacteria carried by fleas on rodents, was entirely unknown, medieval societies operated under the miasma theory, believing that diseases were spread through foul, corrupted air. This misunderstanding led to the creation of specialized, highly aromatic vinegar solutions designed to neutralize these perceived airborne poisons. The most famous of these formulations was Four Thieves vinegar. According to historical legend originating during a severe outbreak in Toulouse and later Marseilles, a band of grave robbers successfully plundered the homes and bodies of plague victims without ever contracting the disease. When finally captured by local authorities, they were offered leniency in exchange for the secret to their immunity. The thieves revealed they had created a potent infusion of red wine vinegar packed with crushed garlic, rosemary, sage, cloves, and wormwood. They washed their hands, faces, and clothing in this mixture before entering infected areas. While the thieves believed the strong scent warded off the deadly miasma, modern analysis suggests a different mechanism. The highly acidic vinegar combined with the natural essential oils of the herbs acted as a potent, localized repellent against the fleas carrying the Yersinia pestis bacteria, accidentally providing a layer of physical protection that allowed them to survive the outbreak. The reliance on vinegar during biological crises was not limited to civilian survival. Early medical practitioners, known as plague doctors, filled the prominent beaks of their heavy leather masks with sponges soaked in vinegar and aromatic herbs, breathing through the acidic filter to endure the stench of decaying wards. Municipal authorities also utilized large stone troughs filled with vinegar at city gates. Merchants and travelers arriving from distant regions were required to drop their bronze and silver coins into the acid bath before any transaction could take place, creating the world's first large-scale currency disinfection protocols. By the mid-18th century, the demand for vinegar had grown so massive that the traditional, slow methods of backyard fermentation could no longer keep pace with urban development and naval exploration. Vinegar production needed to evolve from a seasonal agricultural byproduct into a predictable, mechanized industry. The epicenter of this transition was the French city of Orleans. The French refiners perfected the Orleans method, which was the first formal, standardized continuous production system for high-volume vinegar manufacturing. Instead of leaving wine to spoil in open vats exposed to unpredictable weather, the Orleans process utilized large oak barrels arranged in temperature-controlled warehouses. The barrels were filled with a mixture of high-quality wine and finished vinegar, which acted as a starter culture to seed the new batch with a high concentration of Acetobacter. Specific air holes were drilled into the ends of the barrels to maintain a constant, regulated flow of oxygen, which allowed the bacterial mat, known as the mother of vinegar, to float undisturbed on the surface of the liquid, converting alcohol to acid at an accelerated pace. Every few weeks, a portion of the finished vinegar was drawn off through a spigot at the bottom of the barrel, and an equal amount of fresh wine was carefully funneled in through the top, keeping the cycle going indefinitely. This process allowed Orleans to export thousands of gallons of chemically consistent, high-acid vinegar across the globe, supplying European navies with the industrial quantities of preservatives required to sustain sailors on multi-year voyages of global colonization. The shift toward deep industrialization in the 19th century brought unexpected and dangerous transformations to everyday commodities. As cities swelled with factory workers who could no longer grow their own food, the urban population became entirely dependent on commercial supply chains. Vinegar was no longer just a household flavor. It remained the primary preservative for city dwellers to keep vegetables, fish, and meats from spoiling in crowded tenements that lacked basic sanitation. This massive, inelastic demand created an intense corporate rush to maximize production volume while slashing costs, paving the way for one of the most widespread eras of food fraud in human history. In the mid-19th century, the rapidly expanding metropolis of London became the epicenter of this industrial deception. Authentic vinegar required significant time to ferment from wine, malt, or cider, making pure versions more expensive to produce at scale. To exploit the market, unscrupulous chemical manufacturers and independent blenders began producing fake vinegars to undercut legitimate producers. Instead of relying on the natural biological conversion of alcohol by Acetobacter bacteria, these operations turned to cheap, raw industrial acids. They mixed highly corrosive sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, and wood distilled pyroligneous acid with ordinary water. To make this dangerous chemical cocktail look like genuine malt or wine vinegar, they added artificial coloring agents, such as burnt sugar, molasses, or spent chemical dyes. The resulting liquid was highly acidic and tasted sharply sour, mimicking the bite of real vinegar, but it lacked the organic nutrients and complex chemical makeup of true fermentation. The consequences for public health were devastating. When working-class families used these adulterated vinegars to pickle vegetables or season their food, they were unknowingly ingesting highly corrosive industrial compounds. Over time, the regular consumption of low-concentration sulfuric and hydrochloric acid severely damaged the mucosal linings of the stomach and esophagus, leading to widespread chronic gastritis, painful internal ulcerations, and severe malnutrition, as the digestive systems of consumers were systematically destroyed. Furthermore, because these fake vinegars lacked the proper preservative properties of genuine, complex acetic acid mixtures, the food pickled in them frequently spoiled anyway, leading to hidden outbreaks of lethal food poisoning and bacterial infections across London's poorest districts. This corporate malpractice eventually triggered a major public backlash and helped birth the modern food safety movement. In the 1850s, pioneering analytical chemists and public health advocates began systematically testing the food supply of major cities. Using early chemical titration methods, they exposed the fact that a staggering percentage of the vinegar sold in urban markets was contaminated with toxic mineral acids. The public outrage following these revelations forced governments to act. In the United Kingdom, these specific exposures directly contributed to the passage of the landmark Adulteration of Food and Drink Act of 1860, which was later expanded into the Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875. These legislative frameworks established the world's first formal regulatory definitions of what constituted pure food versus dangerous chemical imitations, creating specialized public analysts to inspect markets and penalize corporate adulteration. The humble kitchen ingredient, through its systemic exploitation by industrial greed, had forced the creation of modern consumer protection laws. As human society entered the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the mysterious biological process behind fermentation was finally unlocked by modern science, transforming vinegar from an unpredictable art into a precise branch of chemical engineering. For thousands of years, humans had produced the acid blindly, relying on luck and tradition to ensure that wine or mash properly transformed into vinegar rather than rotting into useless sludge. This mystery was solved by the French scientist Louis Pasteur. In the late 1860s, Pasteur conducted groundbreaking research into the diseases of wine and beer, formally identifying Acetobacter acidi as the living microorganism responsible for acetic fermentation. Pasteur demonstrated that these bacteria formed a thin, delicate film on the surface of fermenting liquids, acting as a biological catalyst that captured oxygen from the air and bonded it to the ethanol molecules in the alcohol, converting the liquid into pure acetic acid. By proving that the process required both a specific living organism and a continuous supply of oxygen, Pasteur enabled industrial producers to systematically optimize their factories, eliminating the risk of ruined batches and stabilizing commercial chemical manufacturing globally. This precise control over acetic acid chemistry became a critical factor during the global conflicts of the 20th century. When the First World War broke out in 1914, military logistics demanded an unprecedented volume of shelf-stable, transportable rations to sustain millions of soldiers entrenched along static, mud-filled front lines for months at a time. Fresh meat and vegetables decayed rapidly in the trenches, leading to systemic supply failures and devastating nutritional deficiencies among the troops. To solve this, industrial canning and pickling facilities expanded rapidly, using standardized, pure 5% acetic acid solutions to preserve millions of tons of rations, ranging from pickled eggs and pork to cabbage and onions. These acidic rations could endure extreme temperatures, rough transport in wooden crates, and prolonged storage in damp frontline trenches without spoiling, providing soldiers with vital calories and metabolic variety under brutal conditions. Simultaneously, the medical applications of vinegar were rediscovered and refined on the battlefields of Europe. Long before the discovery and mass production of penicillin and other modern antibiotics in the 1940s, field doctors and frontline medics faced a terrifying mortality rate caused by infected wounds. Shrapnel and bullet injuries were instantly contaminated with soil bacteria, leading to rapid outbreaks of gangrene and sepsis. Reverting to the ancient wisdom of Hippocrates but utilizing modern sterile techniques, military surgeons used diluted, purified acetic acid solutions as a primary topical antiseptic. Medical staff washed deep lacerations and surgical fields with the solution, leveraging its low pH to disrupt the cellular membranes of invading pathogens without causing the severe tissue death associated with harsher chemical agents like raw carbolic acid or chlorine bleach. This simple, reliable chemical intervention saved thousands of soldiers from amputation and systemic infections, serving as a vital bridge in antiseptic medicine until the dawn of the antibiotic era. In the contemporary era, vinegar has moved far beyond its historical role as a simple survival tool, experiencing a major structural renaissance that spans modern industrial agriculture, high-end luxury economics, and eco-friendly consumer habits. As the 21st century progresses, the global market is witnessing a profound shift away from synthetic chemical compounds in favor of biologically derived alternatives, positioning this ancient liquid at the forefront of the modern sustainability movement. In large-scale industrial agriculture, the environmental toll of synthetic chemical herbicides has become a point of severe ecological concern. Decades of heavy reliance on persistent synthetic weed killers have led to widespread soil degradation, toxic runoff into freshwater tables, and the emergence of highly resistant strains of superweeds. To combat this, agricultural scientists and organic farming operations have turned to highly concentrated, industrial-grade horticultural vinegar. Unlike standard household varieties, which are strictly diluted to a gentle 5% concentration for safety, these heavy-duty agricultural variants feature a potent concentration of 20% acetic acid. When sprayed directly onto invasive weeds, this highly concentrated natural acid acts as a powerful non-selective contact herbicide. It rapidly strips away the protective waxy cuticle layer of the plant's leaves, causing immediate dehydration and cell collapse within hours of application. Because acetic acid breaks down rapidly and cleanly into basic water and carbon dioxide upon contact with the soil, it leaves behind absolutely no persistent toxic residues, allowing modern agricultural networks to protect crop yields while preserving long-term soil health. Simultaneously, the global consumer market has experienced a massive boom in the appreciation of traditionally crafted, premium vinegars, turning what was once a common byproduct into a highly regulated luxury commodity. The pinnacle of this culinary transformation is found in the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, the exclusive home of authentic traditional balsamic vinegar of Modena. Unlike mass-produced commercial variants that are artificially colored and chemically accelerated, authentic traditional balsamic is produced under strict international geographic protection laws. The process requires the cooked must of specific local grapes to be slowly aged through a dynamic succession of progressively smaller wooden barrels, constructed from oak, chestnut, mulberry, ash, and juniper wood, over a mandatory minimum timeline of 12 to 25 years. During this decades-long aging process, the liquid undergoes a slow, continuous concentration via natural evaporation, absorbing complex aromatic compounds from the various wood types. A single small bottle of this highly regulated, deeply complex liquid can command hundreds of dollars at international auctions, demonstrating how a primitive preservation method has evolved into a symbol of elite craftsmanship and cultural heritage. Ultimately, the long trajectory of vinegar reflects the history of human ingenuity itself. What began 10,000 years ago as an accidental, frustrating batch of ruined wine on a primitive Babylonian trade route has consistently risen to meet the changing needs of human advancement. It sustained the ancient empires of Greece and Rome, protected desperate communities during the horrors of the medieval plagues, forced the creation of our very first consumer safety laws during the Industrial Revolution, and protected lives on the battlefields of the world wars. Today, as human society seeks sustainable, non-toxic solutions to safeguard the future of the planet, this simple, adaptable compound of oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen continues to prove that sometimes, the accidents of the past are the exact tools required to build the future.